This led to the beginning of the forms of government in the Bahamas.
Historical records show that in 1648, Captain William Sales was commissioned as the first royal governor to claim the Bahama Islands in the name of the King of England.
It is believed that their vessel, which was called the William, was wrecked on Devil's Backbone. Then the team moved to Preacher's Cave to take refuge on this site. From Preacher's Cave, the group moved to Cupid's Key, Governor's Harbor, Eleuthera, making it the first settlement in the Bahamas. This was the second form of government in the Bahamas.
The British Empire, intending to expand its control over the Bahama Islands, granted land to the Lord Proprietors of the province of Carolina in the Americas in 1670. The British further appointed royal governors to the Bahama Islands after Captain William Sales.
The development of Charlestown came during this period. Charlestown was the previous name of the capital city of Nassau. In 1695, Governor Nicholas Trott laid out Charlestown. Then it was renamed Nassau on April 12, 1695. Nassau is the capital city of the Bahamas. Also, with the name Nassau, a new fort was built during this period. Royal government, the third form of government in the Bahamas.
During that period, the infamous pirate leader Edward Teach, aka Blackbeard, appointed himself as chief magistrate. Through a persistent seafaring naval campaign, the British Empire finally expelled the pirates, and the Bahama Islands became a full-fledged colony in 1718.
We'll be right back after this break. This moves now to the Bahamian Parliament. Bahamas has come from districts to constituencies. Each constituency is called a seat in the House of Assembly. To date, the Progressive Liberal Party, PLP, forms the majority party, which is the government under the leadership of Prime Minister the Honorable Philip Brave Davis. In the Bahamian Parliament, the official opposition is represented by the Free National Movement, FNM. Now to parliamentary democracy.
Democracy, it derives from the Greeks. It's not exclusive to anybody. What it means simply is that a people have the right to govern themselves, not to be governed by a foreign power, not to be lorded over by local tyrants, but to have a system where the people, the will of the people, are expressed in their government. That's simply, and there are different forms of that. And ours, of course, is the parliamentary democracy, which I argue is probably the best form of democracy. We hear a lot of talk about, I hear sometimes use, this Westminster system, and not understanding. Parliamentary democracy simply means that the people are governed by their own elected representatives. That's the basis of it. And this has been an aspiration of people, including the Greeks, and the way that they did, but other peoples as well around the world. The Iroquois, for instance, the tribes in what is now the United States of America. The Iroquois tribes got a form of democracy, consent of the governed by the governors. And we have a wonderful history of the development of our parliamentary democracy. We need to educate our people more, especially the next generation, about our history and more specifically about our form of government. And it's a system practiced by many other countries, what we call the Westminster system. And there's a reason why this Westminster is so prominent in our thinking and all the rest of it, because it's simply because of one of the oldest parliaments in the world. You notice I said one of them, because there are other parliaments as well. And let me say this, the establishment of our parliament in 1729 I regard as the most important event in the history of the Bahamas. Because I believe that the establishment of that institution very largely accounts for the continued stability that we have enjoyed in this country over many, many years, through many generations, and through many trials. Other countries have gone, some in our neighborhood, gone through revolutions and all the rest of it. We never did that, because somehow the Bahamian people not only got a parliament, but the Bahamian people assimilated the idea of parliament. And so we didn't have to take to the streets when we were aggrieved, when we didn't like the form of government. We campaigned to get in that place. That's where it is, the House of Assembly. And that's quite wonderful. Now, when it was first established, it wasn't quite like that. It was like England. It wasn't a full-blown parliamentary democracy, but the institution was there around which this genuine people's democracy could be built. And that is the significance of 1729, and we are so fortunate.
But this interview is being conducted with one who has represented the Bahamian people in both houses of parliament. We call them upper and lower chambers of parliament.
constitution? Well, they say so. And I try to live up to their expectation. I was fortunate for the late Prime Minister's Amendment Building to call me one Thursday night when I was really at a low ebb and thinking that labor was in vain, to tell me to resign the next day within 24 hours, Friday, as the teacher at Uriah Matthews School. That was in 1982. I served in the Senate from 1982 to 1987. Real deep. We respected these buildings. Look at the buildings. They won't last. The building 10 years later, you break it down and demolish it. Austerity. These will last to tell the story of how we got where we are today. The buildings in Parliament Square were constructed between 1813 and 1815 by the Loyalists. They are modeled after buildings that are found in New Bern, the old capital of North Carolina. These flamingo pink government buildings are excellent examples of the colonial architecture of Old Nassau. The building to the west is a House of Assembly where parliamentary meetings are held. The Senate meets upstairs in the Senate building, and the building to the east was the birthplace of the Hansa in 1979. It is also later housed the Speaker's office. Presently, it houses a court of law. Queen's Victoria's statue, erected in 1905 from funds donated by the public who held her in high esteem, stands in the center of Parliament Square, directly in front of the Senate building.
Given the title of this program, let's take a closer look now at internal self-government, which became effective on January 7th, 1964. Prior to internal self-government in the Bahamas, there were an executive and a grand council. A council of 12 was nominated in 1718. Here's this background. Then, in 1841, the council was divided into two: the Executive Council and the Legislative Council.
And then we had a system that evolved or developed where more of the local community was brought into governance in the form of an executive council, over which the governor presided. And that is what obtained up to the time of majority rule. There was no cabinet. There was an executive council. There was a system of boards.
Further change was made when internal self-government became effective on January 7th, 1964. The Legislative Council became the Senate. Let's establish that internal self-government is ministerial government in the Bahamas. It made way for the former boards to become ministries headed by cabinet ministers. The members of the majority party of the House of Assembly formed the cabinet. With internal self-government, 13 ministries were set up. These included ministries such as finance and tourism, health, aviation, education, maritime affairs, telecommunications and posts, labor and housing, works, road traffic and records, electricity, agriculture, and welfare. Weekly cabinet meetings were held by the ministers of these ministries. Now, the Right Excellent Sir Rowland Simonet is recorded as the first Premier of the Bahamas, whose portfolio included immigration, crown land, town planning, and responsibility for the public service. His name is associated with the period of internal self-government in the Bahamas. In making history by becoming the first Bahamian premier, he served as premier from 1964 to 1967.
We all felt part of one another. My dad and Sir Rowland were boyhood friends. And, like I say, I grew up knowing Sir Rowland as a caring, warm-hearted person. He just helped people. And that, to me, was the important thing about Sir Rowland Simonet.
Simonet Park, dedicated to the memory of a loyal Bahamian and outstanding current son, Sir Rowland Simonet, the first Premier of the Bahamas. This park was dedicated by the residents of the current on the 16th of December 2009 in the presence of Mr. Craig R. Simonet and Mr. T. Brent Simonet, sons of Sir Rowland Simonet. As you can see, is over 220 years old. This is the church that Rowland Simonet attended from a very young child. He attended the Methodist Church right here in the current Lutheran.
The period I'm talking about when I first became associated with him was 64, 65 right then. So I was just getting to know him right then, to know him very, very well. It was after that I really became more involved in the life of Sir Rowland.
What this meant, the Legislative Council had a kind of supervisory second jurisdiction. Of course, the Legislative Council also was a lifetime appointment. So once you got appointed to LegCo, you were there for life, and you carried the title Honorable. So one of the people who, Sir Harry Oakes, for example, got elected to the House of Assembly, and then was later elevated to LegCo, the Legislative Council, which was the second chamber. And he also became, there were members who become members of the Executive Council, which was the Governor's Council that actually did the executive business of the country. and that, of course, was the equivalent of today's cabinet. So the cabinet came into being in 1964 as well, as did the Senate. And what they did with the Senate appointments in 1964 was everybody who was in LegCo with these lifetime appointments were converted to senators, but they were given a 10-year period as senators. One of them was Addie DePuge.
My father was a doctor. My father came to Niagara as a doctor. We had a little hospital in Niagara, would you believe it? In Niagara. And Station found my father on a visit to Chicago. So he came to the Bahamas, and hence here I am. And in 1948, I went to the Tribune as a light-up operator, and then as a reporter, and then as news editor of the Tribune. And that was all thanks to Sir Etienne.
Etienne became a member of the Bahamian Parliament who trained you journalism. And then years later, you also became a member of both chambers of our Parliament. Did you get that from Sir Etienne?
No, that came, well, in as much as I think the fact that I was a journalist and became so keenly interested in the affairs of my country, I think that might have helped, yes. That might have helped. But I used to cover the house. Back then, we didn't specialize as you do today. As journalists back then, I think I mentioned this to you before, one evening you had to go to the Priory basketball court to cover basketball. The next evening you had to cover the House of Assembly.
During this period in Bahamian history, Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II made her first royal state visit to the Bahamas on February 26, 1966.
That picture on the wall, that you cannot imagine or understand like I could, because as they call the picture, a royal salute. And can you imagine me being in charge of the police force? Can you imagine a civilian off the dock? The picture speaks for itself. Off the dock, met the governor, met the royal governor, and brought her straight to me. And that's why it's in that picture there. And the police band, whatever it was at that time, they were, when the police honor guard, they were down for it to take the salute. So that's the humble servant for the right here.
In 1969, amendments to the Constitution changed the title from Premier to Prime Minister. This came with the form of government celebrated as majority rule. Coming up in the next segment.
I have difficulty telling you this story because every time I start telling the story, I want to cry.
Did you know that there are over 30,000 Bahamians with diabetes and another 23,000 with pre-diabetes? Each year, this number is expected to increase. Many people who have diabetes are unaware. If you are having blurry vision, feeling thirsty, urinating frequently, or are unusually tired or losing weight despite a healthy diet, you may have diabetes. If you have a parent or sibling that has diabetes, you are also at an increased risk of developing diabetes. If you have noticed any of these symptoms, it is important to see your doctor, who will perform the necessary tests to confirm the diagnosis. Together, we can beat diabetes.
Hey y'all, what's up?
Hey, what's that?
What y'all getting?
Listen, I've been waiting 1,000 long for you. Hi, I'm Matthew. I will be you guys later today. Can I take your order?
I think Joseph is with Group of Dread.
Y'all see this?
See, this ain't gonna work.
Where the fish gone, though?
But how though?
Don't leave our children with no fish in their future. Protect our sea. Protect our way of life. Protect the Bahamas. To learn how you can help, find us on Facebook at Bahamas Protected. Sea the future.
Born in Delectable Bay. There was no school in Delectable Bay, and we had to walk to school. There was no buses or anything else. There was no roads. You walk along the beach. Oh, you get up early. Get up with the sunrise. And the strange thing about that, nobody had clocks or watches in Athens in those days, only the teacher. And if you were late, you were punished. We used to use the sun. We look at the sun to determine what time it was as we went to school, and if you see it getting late, you start running. I said when I grew up in Athens, we ate what we grew on the farm, and we ate what we caught when we went fishing, and we were happy. We didn't know anything about government when I grew up in Athens. We didn't know anything. The first time I heard about anything about government, I was 14 years old in 1949. Eventually, I got involved in politics, and I thought I wanted to represent Athens, because I thought, growing up there, I knew what they needed.
She is the first woman in the Bahamas to serve in the cabinet. Here is the second woman in the Bahamas to serve in the cabinet.
Was the first woman to be elected to the House of Assembly. She was re-elected on 3 consecutive terms, 1987, 1992, and 1997. Becoming the second woman in the Bahamas to serve in the cabinet. Becoming the first Bahamian woman to serve as Attorney General. And also making contributions to civic society. She has served the Bahamian society long and well.
I never aspired to be a lawyer or to be a politician. When I was growing up, I wanted to be a doctor. I went to high school, and my parents just did not have the money to send me to university for further education. And so I went to work immediately, and I ended up working in the Attorney General's office. How I got there, Elaine, that's another story. But I do believe that your steps are modified, because having got declared as attorney general, as it's below. I was promoted to private secretary for the attorney general, and then to the administrative area, where I was administrator of the legal department. It was at that time I attended a public relations and a public administration course, which was offered by the government here in the Bahamas. It was conducted by Professor Wright from the University of Manchester. And at the end of that course, which was in a two-part series, there were 4 public officers who were selected or nominated to attend either the University of Manchester or the University of West Indies for what was in fact a postgraduate course in public administration. I was one of the persons elected for that, or nominated for that, and I was absolutely delighted. My husband was not so delighted. He had just returned to Nassau from the University of Exeter. We had reunited our family. I had just had our second child, and she was almost 1 year old when this came up. And he said, "How can you do this, Janet? You know, how can you leave? You have 2 children." But my mother had promised that she would take care of the children, so I felt, in good hands. I said, "But, you know, I really want to go to university. I want to further my education. What should I do?" He said, "Study." I was then, as I said, administrator in the Attorney General's office. I became article to the chair of Comment, who later became Attorney General. But it was not what I intended. But it was God's plan. The rest.
Women today